So I understand that you were raised Protestant,
Yep.
and that after years and years and years of all this investigation, eventually you made the decision to convert to Catholicism.
Yep.
And I was wondering how things were with you and your family in light of that.
That's a great question. I really appreciate it. So, I was corresponding privately with a fellow a few months ago who inquired with me about becoming Catholic, and he was coming from the Presbyterian tradition. And I said to him, if you become a Catholic, don't think that you will get rid of all your problems. What you will do is you will get rid of the kinds of problems that Presbyterians have, and you will acquire the kind of problems that Catholics have, right? And Catholics are not without problems. And so my life is not without problems. It is not without difficulty. And in fact, I've undergone some pretty serious trials and testing and a great deal of suffering. And, I would like to sit here and tell you that becoming Catholic has made me just infallibly holy. It certainly has not. It certainly has not. I struggle with sin. I go to confession quite frequently, and I've got a long way to go. But Catholicism has nevertheless undoubtedly benefited my life enormously, and the decision to become Catholic was absolutely warranted and the right one. And I'll give you just a couple of ways that have fundamentally altered, restructured the way I exist as a human being in the world. When I was a Protestant, and look, I catch a lot of flack all the time when I characterize Protestant life. People will write in and they say, Anders, I'm Protestant and I don't go that way, and how can you say this, and who made you the authority on all Protestants? Let me just say right now, I am not the authority on all Protestants, okay? I am testifying to my own particular experience, and if it's not your experience, well, more power to you, okay? But when I was a Protestant, I felt a lot of anxiety about the need to always be right, to always be certain, to be able to demonstrate and prove everything that I thought, and to be able to prove the other guy wrong. And I felt a tremendous burden to do everything in my power to get him to see the world my way, to proselytize, to win converts. I didn't think I was saved by my good works. Or my neighbor. And so the only way I could really assess my spiritual condition or somebody else's was by what did I think? Did I have the right ideas about God? And did my neighbor have them, and I had to get him to think like I did? This makes one into a very bad dinner guest, all right? And hold that thought. I want to come back to it after the break.
Yeah, sit tight there. When you became a Catholic.
Yep. So I'm trying to characterize the difference between my life before and after Catholicism. And what I said was when I was an evangelical Protestant, just me, not everybody else out there in the world that's an evangelical Protestant. I'm not painting a broad brush. I'm just painting myself.
Okay.
But I felt like there was a huge emphasis on being certain, knowing for sure I would go to heaven when I died, knowing for sure there was a God, knowing for sure that my doctrine was right, and then an equally high emphasis on making sure that my way of viewing reality was imposed on my neighbor, because if I didn't do so, then he was going to go to hell and it was going to be my fault. So I had to be right all the time. And I can remember being in grad school, and I remember I was a TA in a course on the New Testament, taught by a guy that I thought was doing a bad job and misrepresenting the teaching of the New Testament in pretty egregious ways. And one of my fellow TAs, who was not a Christian, once remarked to me and said, David, you just seem so angry all the time. Wow. And it was a real wake-up call, because I was sort of perpetually irritated that this guy didn't do as good a job as I thought he should have, and by golly, I would have done a better one, And so that was kind of my way of being in the world. I was, kind of argumentative, had to be right all the time, and it was really important to get other people to see things from my point of view. And one day I woke up and realized, I tolerate behaviors in myself because of my religion that I would not tolerate in anybody else if it was about any other realm of human endeavor. If it was about, your favorite sports team or politics or food or whatever, someone who kind of insisted that you have to see the world my way and I'm right and you're wrong would be an obnoxious individual. And I thought, okay, there's something wrong with me or with my religion if it's making me into an obnoxious person, right? And blinding me to a lot of my own faults along the way. And, the way I see it now as a Catholic, first of all, is that I actually embrace the idea that I don't know for sure that I'm going to heaven. That uncertainty is sort of built into the fabric of the faith from the ground up in a certain kind of way. And it's not absolute certain knowledge that I impose on others that makes me right with God. And it's wisdom and prudence rather than certainty and deductive logic that structure how I think is the right way intellectually to be in the world. And wisdom and prudence require me above all to be open to correction and to take counsel from a lot of different people. And, rather than putting myself in the stance of always having the right answer, I try to put myself in the stance of who do I need to ask for advice on this issue, right? That's a huge difference in the way I go about my life, and being Catholic has a lot to do with that. The Church also says that faith and reason always have to work together. Faith without reason is dogmatism and superstition, and the Church uses that language. And so part of that business of taking counsel is that, I want to be open to expertise wherever it's found.
Sure.
So if I have a psychological issue, I'm going to consult the psychologist. If I have a geological issue, I'm going to consult the geologist. And I don't think that I've got the right answer just because I have the right interpretation of the Bible. And I think that not only has given me, hopefully, at least I aspire to a greater measure of intellectual humility, but it's also exposed me to a lot better answers on a lot of the problems that I face in life. And so, again, being Catholic helped convey this to me. My emphasis in terms of my spirituality is on the acquisition of love and the virtues, right? Not on converting my neighbor. And it strikes me that Jesus didn't call me to convert my neighbor, but rather to be salt and light in the world. And that I can represent Christ in the world through my life to the extent that I'm charitable and virtuous. And he says, let your good works shine before men that they can give glory to your Father in heaven. But like kind of the burden is off.
Yeah.
That the salvation of my neighbor's soul is not on me. And so the tremendous diminishing of the anxiety, sort of the religious eschatological anxiety that I used to feel as an evangelical is gone as a Catholic. And that whole question of anxiety, I'll touch on that for a minute. I learned growing up that Catholics were all neurotic nut jobs who thought they could climb to heaven on their own rosary beads if they flagellated themselves enough. Literally, that's what I thought.
Wow.
Okay, that's the way it was portrayed to me. And what I found is that the whole assurance of salvation thing got a lot better for me as a Catholic than as a Protestant, because when I was a Protestant, it was like, you can know for sure you're going to heaven. But the problem was, as a friend of mine put it, the elect know for sure they're going to heaven, and I might be one of them. Because having the criteria down that you were one of the elect was actually a dicier proposition than one might be led to believe. Whereas now, as a Catholic, all I have to do is persevere. Christ says, whoever perseveres to the end will be saved. Well, I know how to do that. That's within my reach. With grace, I got to ask for grace to do it. Obviously, can't do it on my own strength, but I know where it's found. Eat my flesh, drink my blood, you have life. If I stay in communion with Christ in the church, that means intentionally living a sacramental life, making an examination of conscience, confessing my sins when I'm wrong,
sure,
making a firm purpose of amendment. It's not a get into heaven free card, but the path is there before me, and Jesus says it's easy and light. All right, so the whole assurance of salvation thing got a lot better for me as a Catholic. And then the Catholic Church has this really robust doctrine of spiritual progress. It's not a one-and-done thing. I don't just go forward and receive Jesus at an altar call and it's all good, right? There's a whole theology of spiritual progress based on acquiring the state of dispassion, not being the slave of my appetites, growing in my participation in Christ's point of view, putting on what St. Paul calls the mind of Christ, coming to see the world through Christ's eyes, regarding my neighbor and his dignity in a certain way, and ultimately all the way up to the sort of perfect union of the soul with God in charity. And all of this presumes being embedded in the Christian community, being the recipient, the beneficiary of Catholic tradition and wisdom, having other people to do good to, having other people to do good to me. So all that's woven into the fabric of my conception of Christian life that detaches me from my own sort of egotistic, narcissistic self-concern. And so while I'm no saint, I got long way to go. Have to go to confession all the time, still make tons of mistakes, still have, habitual faults and sins and predominant faults and all the rest of it. I feel like my orientation to reality is just much saner, more rational, less encumbered, quite frankly, less neurotic.
Yeah.
And in some small measure, I'd like to think that I've acquired a certain measure of wisdom that I think is directly attributable to my participation in the Catholic tradition. So in all those respects, I think, my life got better as a Catholic than it was before. And the effect it had on my marriage was palpable and good. And I wrote a whole book about it called The Catholic Church Saved My Marriage. So if you want more on that, go pick up the book and read it. So it did have a very positive impact on my marital life. Now, again, does that mean my wife never gets irritated at me? Absolutely not, right? She tells me what for and what I've done wrong and, all the rest of it. And we have problems like everybody else does in the world. And, my kids are not all from Lake Wobegon either. Like they have their own history of struggles and trials and traumas. And one of my sons, he wouldn't mind my telling you, is my second son. He's the MMA fighter. The kind of blunt, tell it like it is sort of fellow. He once said to me, "Daddy, you're always right about everything, and nobody cares." Right? and that's just the reality of life. You can be a Catholic apologist and talk on the radio and all this kind of business, but rubber hits the road when you come home, and you have to make it stick. And they watch what you do and not what you say. And I got a long way to go in that regard.
Jackson, thanks.